that's for me.
Thanks, Eunice. So the next slide. Okay.
So the first question of this presentation would be first to have a kind of a baseline on how many of you have heard of the extended producer responsibility schemes before the discussion.
We have posted a link in the chat room. You are all welcome to click on the link and then respond to the poll that's on the screen. We'll keep the poll open for the next 1 or 2 minutes. And so, yeah, you're welcome to please respond to it. Thank you.
All right, seems like it's like we have a majority of people knowing EPR scheme. Interesting. Okay, so all right, let's continue. All right, so thank you. That's quite interesting to see that a fair amount of you have already heard of it. EPR scheme is an interesting model. In my presentation, I will try to present it the more broadly possible, but I will also present you a very French focus on how we're doing EPR schemes. So what I'm going to say is not only going to work for every EPR scheme in the world. It's going to be with a very French approach of it. Can go to the next slide. So what is the principle of a EPR scheme? So the extended producer responsibility is a national policy approach under which producers are responsible for the products they place on the market. The way it's materialized, it's for each product placed on the market, an eco fee will be charged. And this eco fee will mostly cover waste collection and waste treatment costs. So there's different ways this eco fee could be used to cover those costs. It could be either through a financial or an operational model. So in an operational model, the EPR scheme would manage all the operation. It would manage contract operators, look for subcontractors to have an operational management of the waste collection and treatment. While if you develop the financial model, then it would be just a funding support to the existing model. So for example, if you have a public waste collection and you developed an EPR scheme for waste that tends to go in the public waste collection, you would just fund the public waste collection for the part of the waste that under EPR scheme are collected. Producers are responsible at all stages of the life cycle. So when I'm saying that mostly it's covering mostly waste collection and waste treatment, it tends to change now. We are shifting from an end-of-life approach to an approach that includes more all the stages of the life cycle. This is not yet very mature. In Europe, it's starting mostly around 2019, 2020. And we're still trying to see a different angle to apply that. We go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to present you very briefly the way an EPR scheme could work. That's not the only way, and there is a lot of nuances to show in that. So when a producer is under an EPR scheme, is producing products that are in an EPR scheme, they can either join a PRO, which is a collective approach with a collective responsibility, or they can stay as an individual have an individual responsibility of the product they place on the market. So then the producer, either directly or through the PRO, they can distribute their product either to distributors or directly to the consumer. So the consumer is using the product, and when it's used, either he can give it back to the distributor or he can give it to public waste collection. In some cases, the consumer can also directly give it to waste management operators. So at the end, what the PRO is going to do, or what the producer might do if it's an individual system, it will fund the waste management operator, it would fund the public waste collection, it would provide the support to the distributor to take back the product, and it would manage all this ecosystem and manage all the waste. We'll get the next slide. To present you a very broad scheme of what we have in France as EPR scheme. In France, we have quite a passion for EPR scheme, and we developed a lot of them. So it started in 1993 for household packaging. I think it's going to reach a peak by 2025 with commercial and industrial packaging. So as you can see, there's a very important range of products that are under an EPR scheme in France. When you look around you, it's like there is very few products that are not under an EPR scheme in France. You also may notice that pesticides are not in it. It's because just technically it's not, it's a different legal frame that pesticide EPR scheme are. Nevertheless, I'm still going to present you a bit more in detail later how the pesticide EPR scheme is working in France. So that's it for my first session.
Great, thank you, Colin, for that introduction. So we will now be discussing question 1. So question 1 is asking us, are you aware of any EPR schemes in your country or a system that works with familiar principles like the polluter pays principle? If yes, please provide examples. If not, are you aware of any interest that's shown by your country, and also to list your country in your response. So we will be moving to the chat room now. So we do encourage everyone to respond to the question with naming your country in your response as well. We'll be discussing this for the next 20 minutes.
And just to answer for the first question, I see how does the system work for chewing gum? It's in the case of chewing gum, it's a cleaning EPR scheme. It means that we're bringing financial support to the collectivity that clean the street with chewing gum. Welcome. South Africa promulgated EPR on 20 March. On specific product or if you okay, so there's an EPR scheme on pesticide. Interesting. And
while everyone's answering question 1 in the chat room, we have launched a poll as well. The link will be posted in the chat room, so you're welcome to still respond to question 1 in the chat room, but to respond to the poll via Mentimeter as well.
Pest control. Okay, so EPR is sometimes considered for chemical management. Because the most common EPR scheme we see are usually on packaging, on electronic. As I say in Nigeria, electrical or electronic system. On batteries, on tires are usually the main EPR scheme that you can see worldwide. Right, on bottles, I think in Canada, yes, there's one for packaging, and there's also one on paint. So sometimes EPR scheme can target extreme. And maybe I would just ask a question. When there is an EPR scheme on pesticide, is it every pesticide that are put on the market, or is there some condition to be part of the EPR? We're going to see the example, for example, in Zambia. It's very interesting to see that there is a lot of EPR scheme that are in place or getting in place on pesticide. And for the one that maybe don't have a strictly EPR scheme, sometimes you might have something that would look like one with, polluters pay principle.
And there's a question for you, Colin. So what is the difference between EPR and product stewardship schemes?
I don't have a very precise answer for this one, but I would think that EPR are more strictly regulated than product stewardship scheme. So there is more a government entity setting targets on so this I'm not really 100% sure of my answer, but I think that one of the main differences is really in terms of legal commitment to the in the scheme. You say in Egypt you have you're targeting specific stream. Do you know which one are you targeting? And so okay, so the container management scheme for returning empties, I think it could be a question on how it is completely in EPR. In EPR would be really on every product in the scope put on the market. So deposit refund system could be part of EPR, but it doesn't have to be linked. It could be independent.
Colin, before we move to the next poll, do you have any comments on the polls on the screen?
Well, I think it's really interesting to see that a lot of EPR scheme are being developed, and I think there is different level of EPR, and I think there's different size of EPR scheme and different target that could be set with a different EPR scheme. But it's quite interesting to see the number of countries that are starting to really implement them, and I would be very interested also in your feedback on the result, on your thought on it. And as I can see, it's really we have a very interesting focus on empty packaging. So for the next poll, we were very interested in which product would be the most relevant to the EPR scheme in your country. So it could be the one in place, but it could be also the one you think should be in place. EPR are often designed to target the most problematic waste, the waste that are expensive to treat, the waste that are difficult to treat, the waste also that could be sometimes difficult to collect. So that would be interesting to see. What do you think would be the most relevant? I can tell we are on a pesticide and chemical target. Yeah. Perhaps maybe in a couple of words, you may say why you think those are the most relevant one, if you identify a specific stream. So we have a lot of chemical product. Sometimes pesticide could be included in chemical product. But chemical product seems to be a big focus here. With electric or electronic products, that could be often very hazardous as well. Right, this is very interesting to see. It's interesting to see that it doesn't really match the most common EPR scheme. Like the most common EPR scheme would be on household packaging, on vehicles, on tires. Well, on electronic waste, it's pretty much matching what's happening. So it's interesting to see that for you it's very relevant to develop EPR scheme on those products. Buildings, it's a very recent one in France, EPR scheme we are developing. It is also a very challenging one because it's a very important industry, and there is a lot of question on what to do with this waste in terms of volumes, especially.
Then for the participants who said no, their countries do not have the EPR scheme in place, perhaps they could let us know the other part of the question asks whether there's interest shown in your country, and if so, by who? So is it by the farmers or consumers or government? So who's showing the interest towards an EPR scheme or organization? If you could just let us know.
Yeah, very interesting to see that in a all right, so we still have a very big majority for chemical products. Description. Yes, on that question, on the pharmaceutical products, there is also EPR scheme that could be a healthcare product, especially shops or any PPE linked to healthcare that could be under an EPR scheme. They could be in the same one, but what we tend to observe is that usually it's different producers that put pharmaceutical product on the market, on the one that put healthcare product in general on the market. So I would get to that on a presentation on EPR, but an important thing when you decide your scope and when you decide which product should be in an EPR scheme, you're also going to look which producer are linked to my product. because they're the one who's going to be responsible. Yeah, smuggled pesticide in general, free riders is a big challenge in EPR scheme. So if as you say, 50% of pesticide are smuggled, it would be a challenging environment to implement an EPR. But at the same time, it could also support some function to decrease this part of smuggled pesticide. We will try to mention that later on my slide.
Okay, great, Colin. I think we can move on to question 2, but do you have any concluding thoughts or comments to make on question 1?
Well, as I said before, it's very interesting to see that you have underlined a lot of EPR schemes that are not always a strong focus in the way EPR scheme are developed. So not really not always the most common one. So I think that's a very interesting element, and it underlines the fact that they should be more developed for pesticide and chemical products than what they are today.
Thanks, Colin. We may go to question 2 now.
All right, so I'm going to present you EPR advantage. You may already know some of them because some of you have already EPR schemes that are getting implemented. So the first one is that EPR could cover end of life and operation waste management cost. So that's one of the great advantage. The other one is that when you're setting an EPR scheme, you may collect an important quantity of data. So for us, for example, we have annual declaration. So all the producers are giving us a lot of data on what they're putting on the market, what are they treating, what are they collecting. And all this information are very useful because they can support the regulators to take more educated decisions and set realistic but ambitious objectives. So when you have an EPR scheme, you have to set objective. Well, it's interesting to set objective to say you have to collect that much of waste, you have to reach that much of collection rate. And this data help you to do that and help you to understand a bit more in details your market, which kind of product are put on the market. So those data then are very linked to the disposal and recycling incentives that I mentioned under it, because you want to say you want to reach a certain level of waste treatment. So for that, you're going to say you want to reach 10%, 50% of recycling as a target, as a mandatory target that the EPR scheme need to reach. At the same time, for disposal, you can say you don't want to go over 10% of landfilling, for example. Another thing that is interesting with EPR scheme is a mandatory product take back on the support to public waste collection. So an EPR scheme might release public services either on the operation side or either on the financial side. So all those advantage, will help you mostly on the end of life phases. We're going to see a bit further how it could help you on a more life cycle approach. But, I just took for now the main advantage of an EPR scheme. Can go to the next slide. So what are the limits and challenge that could be with an EPR scheme? So first of all, I think an EPR scheme needs to be tailored to each country. So when you want to implement an EPR scheme or to continue the development of an EPR scheme to something more structured or more ambitious, then you want to look at industrial capacity on who are around the table when you want to do the EPR scheme. So who are your producer? Is it importers? Is it SMEs? Is it startup? That's going to give you basically a bit of an idea of who are your producers. And then you want to look at the waste treatment infrastructures. So do you already have an infrastructure for this kind of waste you want to treat? What kind of treatment can you do for this kind of waste? And it may, orientate your policy. And for example, if you don't have much treatment capacity, if you go to an operational model, then the EPR scheme will need to invest to develop more infrastructures. And the opposite, if you got a system that's working fine, but it's just costly, then you might want to go to a financial model where it's just going to be a financial support. You also want to look at the waste legacy, how much the waste legacy is in your country on the specific stream you want to put under an EPR scheme. It is, I think, a quite an important one, because you have to decide at some point, is your EPR scheme going to target this waste? And sometimes some waste are not put on the market anymore. So you're going to need sometimes to have a discussion on who is going to take care of those waste. Is it the new producer or is it the old producer? And that's something, an interesting debate you may have when you want to develop your scheme. And the last one is the informal sector. And it should not be forgotten that you need to think around how informal sector is going to be integrated into your EPR. Are you going to aim to raise it, or are you going to aim, to include it, on how you're going to do that? Also, one thing to note is that EPR scheme needs a certain level of administration support. It's not mandatory, but it could bring interesting perspective. So you need, earlier I mentioned that you are going to collect a lot of data, and for that you need to have the capacity to collect data and to supervise the performance. You have to look at how the EPR scheme is going on an annual basis to see if it's increasing the collection of the waste, if the waste treatment are improving, if the system is adapted. And for that, you need people and resources. On the specific case of France, the producer are contributing, for example, to my salary. So I'm part of a public agency, but part of the fund that we have to do our job, to supervise the extended producer responsibility scheme, we are partly paid by the producer. And finally, you need a legal system that would be adapted. So earlier you mentioned smuggled pesticide, but there is also, free riders, so producers that place product on the market and don't want to pay the eco fee on it. And you need also to design legally binding agreements. So when you have a pro or an individual producer, and if you want to develop an EPR, it's interesting to have an agreement where you set up objectives and legally binding objectives. So if you don't reach this objective, that you might have a sanction. So this is things that, are very interesting to support your system and to make it more efficient. But it's also consuming time and resources. So EPR tools, keep in mind that it's not always adapted to every objective and context. It's not a silver bullets for waste. And other tools should complement an EPR scheme for an efficient and a more complete approach. I think that's the next slide. So what could be then the key indicators for the implementation of EPR scheme? But when you have your EPR running, when you already have an EPR, what I believe could be interesting things to look at. So things like know your market. You want to look at how many producers are registered. So you want to look at what kind of market share do I have in terms of producer? How many free rider could I have? But you're also going to look at what type of product, what volume of product are put on the market under my EPR scheme. You also may want to look at the market share under EPR scheme. So for example, on pesticide, maybe your EPR scheme doesn't include household pesticide. So it could be interesting to look at what is the market share here. Like, do I have more professional? Do I have more household? It's other different aspects that could be interesting. For the eco fee modulation, I will go back a bit later on it, but just on the principle is that based on environmental benefits, you will increase or decrease the eco fee. You also want to look at collection. So collection rate is like how much waste are you collecting? For that, you can either compare to a stockpile of waste, so to your waste legacy, or you can compare it to the previous product that had been put on the market last year. So for example, for household packaging, you got a very short life expectancy. So you want to, maybe instead of looking at a stockpile, you would just look like how much product were put on the market last year. Also, you want to look at your collection grid. What is the distance to a collection point? What is the covered area? Is the areas that are not covered by the collection grid put in place? And how many contracts you got with collectors? And that's an interesting thing you can look at. And that's something, for example, we ask is the number of contracts, because then we have an idea that is it just one or two big companies that are doing all the collection, or are you using also a local approach to your collection scheme? You also want to look at the clear segregation, the segregation guidelines. So when you develop different EPR scheme, each of them have a different scope, and sometimes some scope could be very similar. So, but you don't want to overcomplicate the guideline for waste segregation. It needs to be clear for the user. So that's something at the collection point that you need to look. And then also you need to look at which waste are you collecting. Are you collecting the easy waste, so the waste that are easy to collect because they're cheap? Or are you looking at waste that are difficult to reach, difficult to get? And that's the thing. The EPR is supposed to be designed to collect the waste that are difficult to reach. And that's something that is interesting to look at. And then on the waste treatment, you have the very classic kind of indicators, so recycling rate, energy recovery rate, disposal rate. So I'm not going to go much back on it, but it gives you basically an idea of what your waste is becoming. And then you're going to look at exported waste. That's something that's interesting to look, because then you know if you have the capacity or not in your country to treat those waste. And sometimes you see that you have a lot of exportation while you have the capacity, and you may wonder why. And maybe because the infrastructure is not adapted, because it's too expensive, or it could be other reasons. For example, in France, we have a lot of exported waste for some stream, and it's not a question of capacity, it's because it's recycled in Germany. So always sometimes going to Germany to be recycled, because producers want to reach their recycling target, and it's easier to do that exporting the waste to Germany. And the last one is waste legacy treatment. And I think that's an interesting one, because as I mentioned earlier, some waste are not put on the market anymore. So you have to wonder, what kind of waste treatment capacity should I develop for a waste that is not anymore in my country, that's not anymore sold in my country? And that can give you that kind of data collected from the EPR scheme can give you interesting information on an industrial strategy that you should develop to treat waste. So data connection analysis is a key part of an effective EPR scheme, because it keeps you up to date to what's happening on your scheme. And each indicator should be adapted to a specific scheme. You're not going to get a collection rate that's going to be the same for all the schemes. It need to be tailored for each country. Each indicators need to be tailored for each scheme. And it should be reviewed and updated on a regular basis. We can go to the next slide, please. Yeah. So it's EPR scheme, I think, on the review of the indicator, just it could be discussed with a lot of different stakeholders. And I think that could be interesting with EPR scheme. You can put different stakeholders around the table. And that's thing that has been seen for us is a cooperation between manufacturer and waste operators. So before, producers were just placing the product on the market, and they didn't really care about what was happening next. But then, because now they have to reach ambitious recycling targets, then they have to look at, is my waste easy to recycle? Is my waste easy to treat? Is my waste easy to collect? They have to think about the life cycle of the product. And for that, they also need to work with waste operators. So it creates a link in between those two operators, which could contribute to the development of recycling facility or improvement of recycling facility. Sometimes producers can also develop their own recycling facility because they're interested in getting the raw materials back. So for example, for packaging, if you say you have to incorporate 30% of recycled material, then maybe the producer are going to say, oh, then I'm going to try to get my product back and incorporate it in my new product. That could be an approach that could be interesting with EPR scheme. Also, EPR scheme can bring resources for hazard identification. So resources, training to improve the hazard identification on a more upstream segregation, because the producer knows their product best, so they're more able sometimes to identify products that would be problematic down the chain and down the value chain. I'm going to go quickly on the improved chemical management on the life cycle, but just to let you know, in France, we ask to all producers to submit an environmental plan. On the EcoFi modulation, I have my last slide that is on it. On this, I think we'll open maybe a bit of a discussion. On the last development potential is on prevention and communication. So EPR scheme need to raise awareness for household and professional to reduce environmental impact. This could include consume less or consume better. And this is a mandatory in France. It's mandatory that all the producers contribute to a national campaign for waste prevention. It could also bring relevant information to consumer on best practice on waste disposal modalities. So what is the best way to dispose of your waste? Go to the next slide. I believe it's the last one on question 2. That's a bit more an open reflection, and that's something we're starting now in France. So we don't have really an important feedback yet on how is it going. But EcoFi modulation are based on environmental benefits. So the EcoFi modulation would either increase or decrease the EcoFi that is paid by the producer when they place something on the market. So we define some generic criteria, but other criteria could be proposed. So we have reduced ecotoxicity, biosource material, incorporation of recycled material, or improved recyclability. So on today, we are also working on different propositions that would be more specific to chemicals. I haven't included a proposition that would be to different products. It could be substances that affect the recycling of the product. So including POPs, it could be substance of concern, that could be problematic. It could be recycling disruptors. It could be, a lot of chemicals could affect your performance in terms of recycling. It could also be a transparency on chemical use or incorporated. We are looking at how we can do a bonus if you are a producer and you are fully transparent on all the chemicals that are used or incorporated. And this is going further than the CLP regulation, because on the CLP regulation in France, you have a list of specific products you have to indicate it. But what we want to do is transparency for every chemical that are in your product. So if you place a product in 1 year, maybe in 3, 4, 5 years, your product is going to be restricted, but it's not going to be on the label because it was not restricted at the time. And we believe that transparency would help for that. EPR scheme could be an incentive to develop this. And finally, we want to look at if it's relevant to have malus for substance of concern. And I think we will specifically use for specific substances. And I believe that's it for section 2.
Thanks, Colin, for that very in-depth presentation. I see the chat room has already been going, so there's a few comments and questions being made. But just as we move to the chat room now, everyone, we're going to be discussing question 2. So what are the advantages and the limits of an EPR scheme in your country? And I think if you don't have an EPR scheme, you can just foresee, so what would the advantages and limits be of implementing one? So you may begin to discuss the question. We'll be discussing it for 20 minutes.
All right.
I noticed that in the chat room, the participants were discussing about funding. So having these laws in place, but not necessarily having funding, and how that can be addressed.
How what could be addressed? Sorry, I don't see
funding.
Oh. It's always a tricky question. So usually the EcoFi are supporting the majority of the system, but sometimes you can have complementary tax that could bring back a bit the funding, and that's especially relevant when you want to target waste legacy. So for example, when we're developing now an EPR scheme on buildings, and asbestos is a very big question. It's a very important waste legacy. It's very expensive, and we don't expect the EPR scheme to fund everything. So there is a part of the public fund that would help that. It should enforce accountability on the behalf. Yes. So the manufacturer are indeed more responsible on the waste, on the product it puts on the market, because he's directly paying the cost of the end of life. So sometimes we think that eco-fee, we present eco-fee as a tax. It is not a tax. An eco-fee is really just the amount that match the impact at the end of life on the life cycle. But it's not mandatory that it's that it doesn't have automatically an impact on the selling price. Why would it be a limit in Nigeria to monitor the scheme?
There is a poll being posted on the screen, so you're welcome to respond to the questions in the chat room, and then the link will be posted for the poll as well.
Right, I did not mention reuse, that it is a very relevant thing to say, but yeah, reuse could be also quite promoted with EPR scheme, and it's one of the things we are more and more trying to develop. And reduce the number of landfill and incinerator is also something that could be looked, especially landfill, that with it's interesting to set up targets that are complementary to maybe sometimes national target to reduce landfilling. Good to hear, but Iran. So how the EPR scheme is acting on out-of-date products in Iran? Yeah, stakeholder engagement is very important when you want to carry an EPR scheme, because you cannot draft something and impose it to producer without having them around the table. It is very interesting to have them, and that's something that is done for us, and it's done on a regular basis, and we also involve different stakeholders, so the producers, the waste operators, local government that sometimes have to manage the waste, NGOs, you know, the regulators can put around the table a lot of parties and a lot of stakeholders, and that's a very interesting thing to do to implement an EPR scheme. It could reduce the cost of management of the scheme, yeah, of the waste, yeah. On there's two ways I believe you can do that. It's one way because producers are going to improve their product, and the other way is because they can develop a more effective system to treat the waste. And more recycling could also decrease the treatment cost. So advantage would be to combat illegal importation of pesticide. It is an interesting advantage that it could bring, but I believe we also need the support of the government to really implement enforcement, because an EPR scheme, you know, it's producers, so producer doesn't have the legal right, you know, to apply sanction to free riders and to apply sanctions to smugglers. So it could bring on show who are free riders and who are smuggling waste, smuggling pesticide, but it is not going to enforce the regulation. Yeah, stakeholder discussion, I think, is a big one. And another aspect that need to be carried out for the implementation of an EPR scheme is you need to do a study to see what kind of waste you have, on the quantity of waste that you have, on the current problematic. You have to put into context the waste problematic that you have on a specific stream. So that's also one of very important aspect of it, is that the first waste evaluation. Financial monitoring and evaluation is an important thing. And I think I saw a review regulation. It is indeed very interesting, because an EPR scheme could complement existing regulation. And that's something you should look at when you are doing an EPR scheme, that it doesn't contradict other regulation and it's really complementary. Sometimes the EPR scheme can go a bit further, and sometimes it can be just at the level of the current regulation. Yeah, I agree with the Kenya consultation on public participation. Community engagement is also a very important work to do. So the awareness program would be an interesting thing to do when you're implementing it. Also, it could be carried out by the EPR scheme afterwards. So the benefits an EPR scheme can have for pesticides, on human health, on health sector, is if you have a life cycle approach, and if the impact on human health is included in this life approach, you would be able to maybe get the producer to improve their product to reduce this impact, because they would be also responsible for the health impact that they may have. For the health sector, an important consequences today of the health sector is the waste stream, the water stream contamination with pharmaceutical product, and improving the collection of pharmaceutical product could prevent that. It could prevent also smuggling of pharmaceutical product, and at the end, it also can support funding for water cleaning, because it's a big issue with pharmaceutical product. Yeah, baseline study for problematic waste. It's a critical step for the implementation of an EPR scheme. Yeah, existing law, maybe speaking directly or indirectly to the scheme. Right. Limiting hazardous substances, yes, it's something you could specifically target. On maybe highly hazardous one could be also difficult to get. Then when a producer places on a highly hazardous pesticide on the market, then if you would get normally a very important eco fee that would be proportional to the difficulty to treat the waste afterwards, and proportional to the impact it may got on the environment.
Thanks, Colin. And then before we move to the next poll, do you have any comments to make on the poll responses?
Yeah, it's very, very interesting answers, and I agree with them. It's a stakeholder discussion would be a big thing. A vision of what is the regulation and the legislation in place, on how the EPR will be implemented in this, and community engagement is also very important. And yeah, I think that they're all very relevant points. And of course, a waste baseline would be a key part of the implementation. Yeah, advantage, it could attract investment in waste management. That's something that we could see. Sometimes waste would be too expensive to treat, but with an EPR scheme, suddenly it's becoming possible. So you may have operators that would be more likely to invest in waste treatment.
So the next poll has been posted on the screen. The link is in the chat room. So while we begin to conclude question 2, you're welcome to respond to the poll.
If in your answer specific the specific waste stream, if you don't want to explain how an EPR scheme could address obsolete pesticide, maybe specify which was the stream you think it could address. So in Iran, you think that the PR scheme could address the issue of stockpile of pesticide? So yeah, producer can take responsibility for funding and then ensure accountability. They could. It's one of the interesting advantage of an EPR scheme, but it also need a government monitoring.
So I think we can begin to conclude question 2. Do you have any concluding thoughts or comments to make on it?
Well, didn't had as much answer on the previous one, but yeah, it's on the last one I see enhanced collection and disposal. So EPR scheme could play a role on obsolete pesticide. And sometimes it's difficult to measure if it's mostly going to target waste legacy, if it's mostly going to target empty container, if it's going to target both. You have to, I think, to really see what is the most problematic issue on what would be the most efficient way to address it.
Thanks, Colin. So we can go to the next slide and then we'll begin question 3's background.
All right. So we're going to go a bit more in detail on how chemical products on pesticide are managed under an EPR scheme in France. So just to give you an overview of what we could put under chemical products as a EPR scheme. So household and professional chemical products, that's the one I'm managing. Pharmaceutical product, pesticide on agricultural supplies. So it's a bit wider than just empty packaging on obsolete pesticide. Also include all the plastic that could be used in agriculture. Waste oil and lubricant. So it's a big stream in terms of quantity. And one we're getting more recently is industrial packaging. So all packaging used for industrial use. Sometimes pesticide could be in it, pesticides sometimes are not in it. It depends really on the how you want to address the problematic. I can go to the next slide. So to go a bit more in detail on the scope of the EPR scheme. So I put really estimated value for eco fees, not really specific to anything. It's just really to give you ballpark how much could be an eco fee here. That should not be used as a reference. It's really just to give you kind of a scale on how much an eco fee could be on those products, even though it could be more, it could be less. but just give you an idea. So general organization of the EPR scheme in France, we have 350 registered producers, 300,000 farmers involved for a total contribution about 25 million euros. So the products that are included in it is phytosanitary products, so mostly pesticide, fertilizer, tarps and ropes, and seeds. Right, so we can go on the next slide. So the scope for the EPR scheme for chemical. I did not really give a definition on the first one for pesticide because it's I'm not really confident on this one. But for EPR scheme on chemicals, producer could be a manufacturer, a brand owner, or an importer. And I think it's important to underline that a producer could be an importer. Marketplace should also be included. And for us, marketplace were big sources of free rider. In France, we have 3 pro to represent all the producers. Usually they focus on a specific product and they don't overlap. So you may have this situation and we have this situation. Sometimes 2 pro are in competition. It's not the case here. We have 3 pro on different products. The main product user would be household and craft person, but we're getting more and more industrial users because with the recent extension to construction work, we also now include chemical use in construction work. And the EPR scheme here is mostly targeting consumer-sized packaging, so up to 25 liters or 25 kilograms. So the scope is set by a decree. That's why also I say that it's usually interesting to have a legal support here. And it's limited to a specific range of product. And sometimes it could be extremely tricky to decide which product is in it and which product is not in it. Earlier, I was mentioning segregation guidelines. This is exactly where you may create overcomplicated segregation. So that's something we have to be very careful when we're setting a range of products and the rules. Like, is this product in this scheme or is this not? Excluded products could be in different EPR schemes, so from the chemical products, so pesticide, lubricant are in another scheme, or any different regulation system. So for example, industrial waste, the producer is not responsible for industrial waste, but the waste producer, so the one that owns the waste, is responsible. So for us, the product scope, we divided in 10 categories of chemical. Okay, let's next slide. I can give you typical ECOFI for chemical products. So in black, it's the value of the product with the price range of the product, and in green is the ECOFI amount. So as you can see, it's the ECOFI doesn't really add up much cost to the product, and sometimes it's not included on the margin. It's sometimes already included in the margin. It doesn't have to increase the price. Sometimes producer can absorb the cost of the ECOFI. It presents also a bit of the variety of products. So we got solvents such as acetone, we got chlorine, which is a very problematic product. We got paint, which is a product that is produced in extremely large quantity, glue, but a lot of type of glue, some acid, and some cooling liquid. So you can cover a wide range of products with when you would try to address chemical product. All right, go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the EPR scheme on pesticide, how is it working? I'm not going to try to draw you a number, but you got a fair amount of waste collector on the collection point. It's actually a very important one. So how the pro function is coordinating and funding the collection and treatment, is preparing guidelines for waste segregation, and is supporting farmers. So it could provide bags to repack it, it could provide a chemist. Doesn't mean it's always free, but they can provide, kind of a support for farmers. So the waste are packed by farmers. Segregation is completed at collection point. You can have another segregation on the treatment plant, as usually treatment plant do. And then you have transport to the final treatment. As you can see on the map of France, you see the density of collection point here. The most rural area have the most collection point. So you have some areas that are not very much covered, but it could be okay. It could just mean that there is not much waste to collect there. So it could be, you don't need to get an homogeneous collection grid to be efficient. So the waste collected, there's 22 subdivision, which I did not mention here, but you get basically empty packaging, contaminated or rinsed one, used plastic. So there's a huge variety of used plastic, ropes, tarps, etc. On hazardous waste, so obsolete pesticide on PP, contaminated with hazardous pesticide. We can go to next one. Right. So how did it work in France for the French EPR scheme? So I think what's very interesting in waste collection is to look at the one on obsolete pesticide. It started in 2001, and by 2004 it reached a peak, and then it decreased the collection of obsolete pesticide. So waste legacy were treated at the beginning, and then it decreased, and now we just have regular flow of obsolete pesticide. So that's I think the first effect of the EPR scheme that could be observed. On the second one, on a different kind of stream, is plastic and empty packaging. It continuously increased. So we are about 80,000 tons now. 89,000 tons. And it's a continuous growth of packaging. So the waste treatment, obsolete pesticide on PP are mostly incinerated, not to say only incinerated. And then you can see, I'm sorry, it's maybe difficult to read, but the first bar is empty packaging, which is mostly recycled, about 90%. Then you have FIBC, so the flexible bags, which are also mostly recycling. And then you have the plastic, different plastic use, which is also mostly recycling, but also a bit incinerated. And then you have tarps on ropes, which are recycled, but not as much as the other one. A part of it's going to incineration with recovery, and other plastic that are mostly recovered. So it got mostly recycling for this scheme. On general improvement, the EPR scheme also enhance the product segregation and the safety condition. And sometimes we tend to forget safety condition, but it's very important because the EPR scheme could bring more support, more training, more PPE, or more packaging equipment to improve the collection of the waste. So the program took some time to really start, but now there is a continuous growth. So it's sometimes we are very ambitious at the beginning, but sometimes it could take a bit of time, change of habits, implementation of a new organization. You can also have pilots that took a bit of time to start, but it's important to keep in mind that you want to look maybe sometimes on the long term and not just on a 3-2 years very efficient result. So waste legacy were extremely important and represent an important tonnage. Just to tell you, the plastic are recycled mostly in use and are not in contact with human. So it's a very specific recycling target. I think that's a next slide. Not sure how much time. I have 5 minutes left. So producer contribution for the chemical product one, so it's a larger scheme. So it's about 4 million tons that are put on the market every year, and 615 registered producer. We got in 2020, first we have some issue with the eco fee amount in 2021, but with us 47 million euros collected. 2% should be spent on research and development. And this is a bit the difference with the scheme for pesticide and the scheme for chemical products. The scheme for pesticide, it's a voluntary scheme. So there is less, the legal frame is less stringent, while for chemical product, it's way more stringent legal frame. So 2% should be spent on research and development, and 1% should be spent on communication and prevention. We have a bit less collection point than for the pesticide. On the total collected with 45,000 tons, mostly incinerated with energy recovery, 10% disposal, 2% recycling. On that here, we have to face that we are having a challenge to reach interesting recycling rates for chemical products. So we have a problem with waste separation because we have a lot of waste that are difficult to separate from the packaging. So EPR scheme, in this case, on the past 10 years, did not really improve waste treatment, and it's something that we are trying to be more focused. So lately with paint recycling, we believe that we're going to reach about 30% recycling, but we're still not really in a very, very efficient system for recycling. Another general improvement is that distributor take back did improve the collection grade and did release the public system. Hazardous waste collection it could be difficult, especially for public system when there is a lot of waste coming up it could be something challenging. And it did improve the product segregation and the safety conditions. So the same thing as for the pesticide EPR scheme. So recycling remains an important challenge. Packaging could be contaminated with hazardous substances, which is the same case as a pesticide one. And a few substances have a valuable technical solution. So we can recycle paint, we can recycle solvent, but it's still difficult to recycle other products such as glue or small quantities sometimes. Like solvent could be in a small bottle, acid could be in a small bottle. It could be difficult to recycle those because they're in small quantity. Okay.
Thank you very much, Colin. It's very informative. So we'll be moving on to question 3, which is asking what would the ideal EPR scheme to improve chemicals and pesticides and waste management in your country be? List your country in your response. So we welcome all participants to move to the chat room where we will be discussing question 3. I see there's already a question from Frederick for you.
Right. How do you so when there's more than one pro for a specific waste stream, you have to it could be tricky because you have to get funding to be sharing between the two pros. So if a pro collect more waste than the other, you have to look at the market share of each pro. And the pro, for example, if a pro got 60% of the market share, you need to collect 60% of the waste, basically. So you have to equilibrate what's happening between the two pro. And usually they're looking at the regulator to do that. So they have to provide annual declaration, which are usually confidential. And then you have to do an equilibrating between the two pros. So it could be a challenging thing to do. And when there is existing voluntary EPR scheme, when you're developing a new EPR scheme and there is already an existing one which is voluntary, it could be also difficult, and you don't want to erase what's existing if it's working. So you're gonna try to build your EPR scheme around it. Mostly we use the system already in place. The voluntary scheme could become a normal EPR scheme, or you can just put more impose more stringent condition to the voluntary scheme existing to be closer to what a normal EPR scheme could be. I hope this is answering your question. Starting, let's see my question. So the additional policy that would complement EPR scheme is something interesting because working just on EPR scheme, sometimes when you have a hammer you see just nails. Well, here's the same. EPR scheme is not the perfect tool, and it should be complemented with other policy. And that's I think what we're kind of looking at this question. What do you maybe already have in place, or what could you put in place to improve your EPR scheme to develop? Because it's not going to be the perfect tool for everything.
We have posted a poll on the screen, and it's asking list additional policies that could complement EPR schemes in your country. And so you can just click on the Menti link in the chat room.
What is JV? Sorry, I'm on the question from joint venture, sorry. Right. It has to be based on decision. Yeah. Yeah, joint venture could be sometimes a good way to address it. So a very simple example of an additional policy that could be complement sometimes just to set a limit for landfilling. You know, so the EPR scheme could work around a landfilling regulation. Just to give you an example of policies that could be implemented. Right, pesticide management facility on healthcare waste management, having rules on how to manage the waste, so the EPR scheme have to comply with those rules. It's a good point. Distributing. Yeah, mutually agree on frameworks, and Kenya is an interesting approach. Sometimes difficult. It's difficult to put everyone around the table and have everybody happy at the end. It's the consensus could be very difficult to reach, but consultation remain important. It's difficult to. Policy on knowledge waste collection is you need a solid waste management policy. Cooperative, as is mentioned for Zambia, is also it's a very good thing to include community. It could be used for the collection point. It could be used just to be generally involved in the discussion process. But yeah, it is as mentioned, UN cooperation between all organizations. I also believe that there is sometimes international convention that could complement the EPR scheme. So the Rotterdam Convention, for example. Yeah, reducing with IPM. It's a good way to complement an EPR scheme, and actually an EPR scheme can also support IPM. You know, bring in fund to get more IPM implemented. So Kenya has developed regulation for EPR, but are awaiting approval. Interesting. More involvement everyone has to take, right? So you say producer would be at the center in Kenya. That's very interesting. And actually the way the governance is managed in Pro is also something that is very interesting to look at. So for example, sometimes in EPR schemes, the problem could be that you would have a producer that would represent most of the market share, would decide for everyone. So you may also have, consider competition between producer not to be threatened by an EPR scheme. So the way a Pro have its governance, it's also something we have to be careful. or it could be, a competition disruptor. Chemical management policy, yeah, it's so international convention, yeah, as mentioned, yeah, I think Basel Convention, Stockholm Convention, and Rotterdam Convention are good example of convention that could complement an EPR scheme. We mentioned export, we mentioned import, and we mentioned POPs, which are, in a very, very important part of waste management.
Okay, great. So we have another poll on the screen, and it's asking us what you think are the indicators for successful EPR schemes for your pesticides and chemicals in your country, and then list your country and your response. The link will be posted in the chat room as well.
Well, I mentioned earlier indicator, you might reuse them, but maybe you could develop a bit why you think they would be successful in your country. Well, why they would be relevant in your country. So. Legally binding measure, right? Yeah, that's, I agree with Aden on a waste management law. Yeah, percentage of waste reduction is a great indicator. So you would need a baseline then on compared to what your waste will reduce. As I say, indicator could be annual, or it could be based on the length of an agreement. So a pro usually have an agreement for a couple of years, goes to up to 6 in France. So you would set targets on the length of the agreement or annual targets during the entire agreement. So the waste reduction percentage could be then either on an annual basis, or it could be the entire one. Volume of container managed, right? Collection percentage achieved. Yes, analyze, as I said, collection rate could be based on different things. It could be based on the stockpile. It could be based on the annual flow that you have, and it could be based on what is being put on the market. And it's sometimes tricky, to find the most relevant collection rate. But it is a very, very important indicator in a successful EPR scheme. Reduce waste volume, yes, it is. Such as funding would be an indicator that the scheme is working and you get funding. Yes, pesticide poisoning, right? Pesticide poisoning could be an interesting indicator. That's a very interesting approach. Looking at health data and the potential impact. That's a very interesting point. Decrease percentage of improper container management. Yeah, percentage decrease of scattered empty container used by farmers. Also, in indicators, sometimes it's when you want an indicator, then you need the data to support it. So getting the percentage of scatter empty containers would mean that you also need to run kind of campaign to measure how much containers are scattered. So that could be done by the EPR scheme, but that also could be done by the government, as a general environmental policy. So setting up an indicator is also asking for specific data. And when we're asking for it, we have one, asking data is something that is time consuming and that it, could take a lot of resources. So we have to be very careful as a regulator when we're setting an indicator, because that means we need that much data and we need to be sure that is really useful. Oh, I didn't have the time to read, I think the one just before. Right, thank you. No stockpile, right? Yeah, no stockpile. And I think I didn't have the time to read the first two as well. Could you go? Yeah, in Kenya, reporting rate. Okay, yeah, the reporting rate by the producer, law and regulation in place. Yeah. Yeah, increased number of manufacturer and importer in the scheme. So the first year, you're always going to get free riders. And we, for some scheme in household packaging is from 1993 on, we still got a group, some free riders. So even in 20 years, even in 30 years, you're still going to have to fight free riders. So increased number of manufacturers, importers, is a very interesting indicator. Percentage of waste managed through an EPR scheme. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting because in France, we got a lot of EPR scheme, and now with the construction building waste, it's going to increase in terms of volume. And earlier I say, when I look around in France, I even wonder what's not under an EPR scheme. So getting a share of what percentage of your waste in your country are under an EPR scheme is an interesting data, because then you get a sense of how relevant EPR scheme could be. Yeah, municipal waste operator involvement it's a good indicator. Public information campaign. It's sometimes difficult to measure how you raise awareness, but you can always measure how many campaigns you've done and for what budget you've done this campaign. So sometimes also how much money have been spent. It is not giving you much of the quality that have been done, but it's also an interesting indicator. So yeah, an indicator could be financial. So how much support the pro send to research and development, how much support is sent to public waste collection, how much support you bring to communication and awareness. So that could be an easy indicator. And after that, you might want to go a bit deeper and see what kind of communication is done, but that's more qualitative than a classic indicator. Just budget or more funding. Right. Farmers, percent of farmer aware is an interesting one. Right. Yeah. With more pesticide producer. Right. Obsolete, expired pesticide disposed. Yeah. So how much of the pesticide could be a percentage or could be a tonnage, depending on how you want to frame your scheme. But there's a lot of very interesting indicator, and it's underlining each time which data do you need to get this indicator. I think that's one of the things I think to take away when you're setting an indicator is really wondering which data you do need and how difficult it would be to collect the data. What would be the robustness of the data? Is it going to be relevant, or is it going to be a rough estimation? That's a lot of things to consider when you're looking at the indicator.
Thanks, Colin. I think we're going to start to wrap up the discussion. I see there's one comment that came through if you maybe want to have a look at that. But then after that, you're welcome to just give your concluding thoughts and yeah, just a summary of the discussion today.
I'm not sure I would have the time to answer you, Stephen, but very long question. I think there is different results on EPR scheme, and sometimes it's not working, sometimes it's working, and I agree that competition should promote pro quality, not kill it, and it's a difficult equilibrate situation to find. I'd be happy to discuss it further because I won't have the time to really answer to each aspect.
Okay, great. There is an evaluation poll on the screen. You're welcome to complete it. And then I think that concludes the discussion for today. Yeah, we just want to thank everyone for just generating such an engaging discussion in the chat room. And then thank you very much, Colin, for taking us through just the EPR schemes and giving us a lot of information about it. We will be sharing the PowerPoint presentation as well as a digest of the discussion of this discussion in the next few days. So we do encourage you to sign up to the pesticide discussion forum if you have not done so already. And we wish you a good weekend ahead. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. And don't hesitate to reach me if you have any questions. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Colin. Thanks all.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.